Westfield police officers arrive at the request of neighbors of the Breeze Knoll mansion to do a wellness check after noticing no activity in the residence for over a month. Police are informed the lights in the mansion have been burning 24 hours a day. In fact, they've been burning so long, many of them have begun to go out. Neighbors fear something is wrong. Gaining access through an unlocked window, police make their way inside. They find the mansion unusually cold and can hear music playing. One of the officers would later explain it as the sounds of a funeral dirge. As they continue their search, they enter the ballroom, where they are met with a sight that none of them would ever forget. 4 bodies lying on the floor wrapped in sleeping bags, placed side by side. As they pull back the covering of the sleeping bags, they discover 3 teenagers and an adult female, all shot at close range.
Wait, 18, roger.
The Westfield police have arrived at the home of John List, a 46-year-old accountant. Inside are the bodies of 3 teenagers and an adult woman. They would later learn the bodies were Helen List and her sons, 15-year-old John Jr., his 13-year-old brother Frederick, and 16-year-old sister Patricia. Their father, John, was not amongst them. As police continue searching, they make their way to the 3rd story, where they find the deceased body of John List's 84-year-old mother, Alma, also shot at close range. Breeze Knoll has now become a major crime scene. The evidence technicians, along with detectives, has discovered a blood trail from the kitchen to the ballroom. It seems the killer shot each of the victims in the kitchen, then dragged their bodies into the ballroom, where they were placed in sleeping bags and their faces covered. The only exception is John List's mother, laying dead in the hallway 2 floors above. Now police must make a determination if John List is also a victim, or is he the killer? However, their question is soon answered when detectives discover a letter written to the pastor of the local Lutheran church. Not only in this letter is a confession, but an explanation. The letter is dated November 9th, 1971, leaving detectives with the chilling truth that John List is now on the run, and even worse, he has a 1-month head start. Two days after the bodies of John List's family were discovered, police find his car abandoned at Kennedy Airport in New York. The parking voucher was date-stamped November 10th, but there was no record of him taking a flight. It's at this time police issue a nationwide murder warrant for John List. FBI offices across the country are now on alert in all 50 states to be on the lookout. Back in Westfield, police begin to try to piece together the timeline that led to the annihilation of his family. Neighbors revealed that List was not sociable and didn't appear to have any friends. At best, he seemed reclusive. What led John List to the point where he felt his only choice was to destroy his entire family? He had contacted the school to inform them that John Jr., Frederick, and Patricia would be away for a few weeks while he and his wife were to tend to a sick relative. However, the drama teacher became concerned when Patricia, who was in an upcoming production at the school, did not return. He informed police that Patricia would have told him if she wasn't going to be able to do the show. As police continued to dig into John List's background, they discovered that he had lost his job at the bank, and with no income, the bills were beginning to mount up. List, however, didn't seem to make any attempt to regain employment. Instead, he rose early daily, dressed for work, left the house as usual, and then would spend the day sitting at the train station reading the newspaper. The purchase of Breeze Knoll in 1965 for $50,000 would have translated to a worth of over $400,000 today. Depending on John List's accounting position at the bank, his personal worth would have been looked at in order to secure a loan. It appears he was the sole income earner, and buying a 19-room mansion of this size could have easily overwhelmed them financially. Police later learned he had already taken out a second mortgage and had been siphoning money from his mother's accounts to help cover during his unemployment. Aside from the loss of his position at the bank, it seems that his relationship with his wife was also crumbling. He also appears to have become concerned with his daughter, that Patricia had taken an interest in acting and become involved in the school drama program. List felt that if his daughter became involved in show business, she would stray from the faith. At dinner one evening, he asked his family after they were dead, would they prefer burial or cremation? This question was allegedly reported to Patricia's drama teacher. However, it seemed the teacher didn't take it very seriously and thought perhaps it was simply a teenager trying to get attention by being overdramatic, but obviously realized something was wrong when she didn't return to school. As police searched the house, his confession letter states the guns used were in his desk. They found a 9mm semi-automatic and a Colt .22 revolver. When the autopsies were performed, it confirmed all had died as a result of gunshot wounds to the back of the head, although John Jr. had suffered multiple gunshots. Police assumed he must have fought back and attempted to run. Upon reading the confession letter, detectives attempted to match it to the events they were now faced with. The chilling, emotionless letter was the first major step in attempting to understand the mind of John List. Dear Pastor Raywinkle, I am sorry to add this additional burden to your work. I know that what has been done is wrong. From all that I have been taught, and that any reasons that I might give will not make it right. But you are the one person that I know that, while not condoning this, will at least possibly understand why I felt I had to do this. 1. I wasn't earning anywhere near enough to support us. Everything I tried seemed to fall to pieces. True, we could have gone bankrupt and maybe gone on welfare. 2. But that brings me to my next point. Knowing the type of location that one would have to live in, plus the environment for the children, plus the effect on them knowing that they were on welfare, was just more than they could and should endure. I know they were willing to cut back, but this involved a lot more than that. 3. With Pat being so determined to get into acting, I was also fearful as to what that might do to her being Christian. I'm sure it wouldn't have helped. 4. Also, with Helen not going to church, I knew that this would harm the children eventually in their attendance. I had continued to hope that she would begin to come to church soon. But when I mentioned to her that Mr. Jutt said he wanted to pay her an elder call, she just blew up and said she wanted her name taken off the church rolls. Again, this could only have an adverse result for the children's continued attendance. So that is the sum of it. If any one of these things had been the condition, we might have pulled through. But this was just too much. At least I'm certain they've all gone to heaven now. If things had gone on, who knows if this would have been the case. Of course, Mother got involved because, of course, doing what I did to my family would have been a tremendous shock to her at this age. Therefore, knowing that she is also a Christian, I felt it best she be relieved of the troubles of this world that would have hit her. After it was all over, I said some prayers for them from the hymn book. That was the least I could do. Now for the final arrangements. Helen and the children have all agreed that they would prefer to be cremated. Please see to it that the costs are kept low. For Mother, she has a plot at the Frankenmuth Church Cemetery. Please contact Mr. Herman Sheckless, Route 4, Vassar, Michigan, 41768. He's married to a niece of Mother's and knows what arrangements are to be made. She always wanted Reverend Herman Zender of Bay City to preach the sermon. But he's not well. Also, I'm leaving some letters in your care. Please send them on and add whatever comments you think are appropriate. The relationships are as follows. Mrs. Lydia Meyer, Mother's sister. Mrs. Eva Meyer, Helen's mother. Jean Seaford, Helen's sister. Also, I don't know what will happen to the books and personal things, but to the extent possible, I'd like for them to be distributed as you see fit. Some books might go to the school or the church library. Originally, I'd planned this for November 1st, All Saints' Day, but travel arrangements were delayed. I thought it would be an appropriate day for them to go to heaven. As for me, please let me be dropped from the congregation rolls. I leave myself in the hands of God's justice and mercy. I don't doubt that He is able to help us, but apparently He saw fit to not answer my prayers the way I hoped they would be answered. This made me think that perhaps it was for the best as far as the children's souls were concerned. I know that many will only look at the additional years they could have lived. But if finally they were no longer Christians, what would be gained? Also, I'm sure many will say, how could anyone do such a horrible thing? My only answer is, it isn't easy and was only done after much thought. Pastor, Mrs. Norris may possibly be reached at 802 Pleasant Hill Drive, Elkin, home of her sister. One other thing. It may seem cowardly to have always shot from behind, but I didn't want any of them to know, even at the last second, that I had to do this to them. John got hurt more because he seemed to struggle longer. The rest were immediately out of pain. John didn't consciously feel anything either. Please remember me in your prayers. I will need them whether or not the government does its duty as it sees fit. I'm only concerned with making my peace with God and of this I am assured because of Christ dying even for me. P.S. Mother is in the hallway, in the attic 3rd floor. She was too heavy for me to move. John. Detectives now had something to work with in regards as to what happened, and began to piece together John's timeline. It seems the murders began after the children left for school, with Helen being the first victim. List then ascended the stairs to the 3rd floor and shot his mother, Alma. Afterwards, he drove to the bank and closed both his and his mother's accounts. Then to the post office to stop the mail and post the letters he had written to the school explaining the children's absence for the next several weeks. He then returned home and made himself lunch and waited for each of his children to arrive home. Patricia was first. As she entered through the kitchen, John snuck behind her and shot her in the back of the head. He then drug her body into the ballroom and laid it on top of a sleeping bag. The same was done to Frederick. And when it came to John Jr., he decided to not wait, but instead drive to the school where his son had a soccer game. He watched him play and even stated, "It looked like he was having a good game and was having a good time." They then drove home, and when they entered the kitchen, John Jr. set down his soccer bag, and List shot him in the back of the head. But this time, things didn't go as planned. According to List, John Jr. was thrashing, so he kept shooting. But police believe John Jr. fought back, and was ultimately shot a total of 10 times. It's at this point where John List compartmentalizes what he's just done to his entire family. As they all lay dead in the ballroom and his mother in the attic hallway, he made himself dinner. He likened this to his time in World War II, that after a day of killing Germans, his troop would be hungry and come back and eat. In his mind, the murders he just committed were no different. After dinner, he cleaned up and went upstairs to bed. The next morning, he lowered the thermostat all the way down to 50 degrees in hopes of keeping the bodies from decomposing. After turning on all the lights in the house, he put the radio on a favorite classical music station to give the appearance that someone was home in case intruders came lurking. He then drove his car to Kennedy Airport and with approximately $2,000 from his account, took the train to Denver, and there John List disappeared, and Robert Clark emerged. He takes a menial job as a fry cook in a local diner, keeping himself anonymous. And as the days went on, and police never came, John List began to go back to his old life. He eventually became an accountant again, and remarried a fellow church parishioner, Dolores Miller. In his own words, "I rarely ever felt guilt or thought about what I had done. I just thought about them less and less, and wanted to live life freely and not be incarcerated if at all possible." As the years wore on, it had become 3 years, then 5, and then on every following anniversary of the murders, police would try to jog the memories of Westfield residents and even employed the media to aid them in their continued search for John List. However, unfortunately, all tips and leads never went anywhere. Police admitted no matter how many came in, not one was ever close to capturing him. Then in 1988, a new series called America's Most Wanted, hosted by John Walsh, appeared on television. Walsh himself had been the victim of a tragic loss of the murder of his son Adam at the hands of serial killer Otis O'Toole. Westfield police thought this might be the break they needed and approached America's Most Wanted, but was turned down due to the case being so long ago. They felt that it was far too cold and that there was no idea what John List would look like 17 years later, and thought perhaps the main reason no one ever heard anything or had anything to report was that maybe John List was already dead. But John List wasn't dead. He was now living in West Virginia with his wife, working at an accounting firm, and even more ironically, was a fan of the show America's Most Wanted. He said he wondered if they were ever going to do his story, and after 9 months of Westfield police diligently approaching America's Most Wanted, in April 1989, they finally accepted the case. And on May 21, 1989, John List was the lead case of the broadcast. They even went one step further and employed an artist to do a bust of List, aged as to how he might appear some 18 years later. List himself saw the tail end of the broadcast and was surprised at how accurate the bust was, right down to the glasses. He even commented that he didn't realize that police had that kind of technology. Immediately after the broadcast, more than 200 tips came in, with one from Denver that stood out. Neighbors of John List, Wanda Flannery and her daughter, had watched the episode that evening. Wanda's daughter, Eva Michelle, stated, "It all started adding up. He was an accountant, a Lutheran, had a scar behind his ear. He was well put together, a classy dresser. And by the time they got to the sculpture, I was convinced it was him. And the clincher to me was the glasses. Bob Clark is John List." Wanda Flannery told the FBI that John had recently moved to Richmond, West Virginia, and was using the name Bob Clark. FBI began an investigation in Richmond and finally closed in and approached him at his job and asked if he was Bob Clark, to which he replied, yes, that he was. And the agent pressed further and said, "Are you John List?" And he denied and stated that he was Robert Peter Clark. However, the FBI had his fingerprints from a gun application he had obtained 1 month before committing the murders. Even though he refused to admit it, detectives knew Bob Clark and John List were the same man. During his trial, the story emerged as to how it all came to a crescendo that would end in the murder of his entire family. From losing his job, the mounting debt, and the moral decay of his family. In his mind, the only way to spare them hell was to make certain that they would all go to heaven, and that would be to murder them before it was too late for their souls. And he had hoped that God would eventually forgive him so that he could be reunited with them one day in heaven. But in reality, John List was looking for a clean slate. He was bitter that his wife had lied to him about being pregnant after they first met, tricking him into marriage, that his dreams of being a financial success not realized, his children wanting the things of the world and not attending church. This sent John List into a spiral that left him believing that killing them all was the only solution. When he later met and married Dolores Miller, he lied to her, telling her his first wife died of cancer and that he had no children. Even during the entire trial, Dolores continued to believe in his innocence. but the jury handed down 5 counts of first-degree murder, and John List was sentenced to life without parole. While the catalyst for John's reasoning of choosing murder over the embarrassment of going on welfare, it had all come down to money and his mountain of debt, mostly due to the costly maintenance of the Breeze Knoll mansion. However, in a true twist of irony unbeknownst to John, it was reported that the ballroom at Breeze Knoll had a skylight made of Tiffany glass that at that time was worth well over $100,000, more than enough money to liquidate all his debt. But John List had already committed murder in his heart. The die was already cast, and there would be no turning back. 2 years after the murders, Breeze Knoll was burned to the ground. During research for this story, I discovered actual video of John List recounting the events long after he had been incarcerated. In his voice, you get a sense of no remorse. You don't sense an angry, evil man. You simply sense a man without a moral compass and devoid of all empathy for his actions. Also, during the research, we kept coming back to the drama teacher that had contacted police about Patricia not showing up for the school play. There has been many back and forth statements that the drama teacher found the bodies. However, police refute that statement. And in one of the most bizarre events regarding Patricia, we discovered there was a rare, low-budget home video type of movie made in 1991 called Patricia List's Story, written, directed, and starring her drama teacher, Edwin Iliano. This video makes it appear that Patricia was possibly in love with him, or at least he may have fantasized she was. In it, she tries to warn him that she believes her father's going to kill her entire family, and that Patricia was potentially sexually promiscuous, and perhaps hoped she could seduce him to get away from her father. In the film, he portrays that he went to Breeze Knoll and climbed inside a window and discovered the bodies, but didn't report it to the police until 2 days later. Aside from the fact that it is extremely hard to watch, mainly due to the awful acting and suggestive themes, it's disturbing on how he portrays the 16-year-old. It also does seem odd that the film was made shortly after John List's arrest in 1989. We don't know if Iliano was attempting to just attach his name to the famous murders, or if he was living out some weird fantasy. Iliano died in 2009. John List would eventually die in prison in 2008 at the age of 82 from pneumonia. The boogeyman of Westfield was dead.